He priced everything he ever owned. That was his sickness. A man who could tell you the worth of a saddle by the sound its leather made, the value of a mare by the way she carried her head. But there was one thing on his ranch he could never put a number to, and when it tore down the middle, he thought he had lost the last of his wife forever. Then a woman he was raised to fear picked up the ruined thing, turned it over in her brown hands, and said the only 3 words that would change the rest of his life. "This can heal." She wasn't supposed to be there. Her people were being marched off the land his grandfather had stolen. Half the town wanted her gone, the other half wanted her worse than gone. And the man telling you this story, a widower with dust in his lungs and a debt he couldn't pay, was about to do the one thing no one in that valley would forgive. He was going to watch her mend every torn stitch he owned. And then he was going to ask her to help him weave a future that neither of their worlds had any room for. Stay with me, because this isn't a story about a cowboy who saved anyone. It's a story about a woman who repaired a broken man one thread at a time, and what it cost them both to be caught doing it. The wind came off the dragoons that morning like it had a grudge, and I was standing in the doorway of Halloran's trading post with my dead wife's saddle blanket torn in half in my hands, trying not to make a sound like a man breaking. I want to be honest with you from the start because that's the only way I know how to tell it. I'm not a soft man. I keep a little ledger in my breast pocket, leather cover gone gray from sweat, and in it I write down what things cost and what things are worth, which my Cora used to say were 2 different columns, and I only ever understood one of them. A good rope, 40 cents, worth $1. A day of another man's labor, 75 cents, worth whatever kept the fences up. I could price the whole valley if you gave me an afternoon. It was the one thing I was ever any good at, and it was, my wife said, the reason she married me and the reason she near left me twice. So understand what it meant that I could not put a number to the blanket. She'd woven it the winter we married, 1871, from wool she carded herself, dyed with something out of the hills that made a red I've never seen since, not blood red, not brick, but the color of a thing that's alive and knows it. She'd worked a pattern into it that wasn't from any book, just her own hand talking. When she died of the fever 3 years back, she was under it. I burned the mattress. I could not burn the blanket. I'd carried it on my saddle every day since, folded so the tear didn't show, because a mule had spooked in the spring and dragged my rig across the fence wire and opened it up the middle like a wound, and I hadn't been able to look at it straight since. I'd brought it to Halloran that morning to see if the Mexican woman who did his mending could close it. Not fix it, I knew nothing could fix it. Just close it so I could stop feeling the cold come through when I slept out. The Mexican woman was gone. Her husband had taken work down in Bisbee. "There's the Indian," Halloran said, not looking up from his ledger, which was fatter than mine and honester in only one column. "Does hide work, blankets, whatever, cheap. She's out back." I should tell you what a word like that meant in that valley in that year. It was 1885. Geronimo was out somewhere in the Sierra Madre, and every rider who came through told it different, that he'd burned a ranch at Cloverdale, that he was 50 men, that he was 5, that he was a ghost. The army had penned most of the Chiricahua down at San Carlos in the flats where the water made you sick, and the government beef came in green. Men I drank with had lost brothers to Apache raids. Men I drank with had shot Apache children and called it clearing brush. I had done neither, which in that place made me a coward to some and a saint to none. I had mostly kept my head down and my fences up and grieved my wife and priced my losses, and I had learned the great convenient lesson of my generation, which was to think of a whole people as weather, a thing that happened to you, not a thing that could hurt or hope. So when Halloran said, "the Indian," I felt the old flinch go through me, the one they raise you with, and I almost took my blanket back and left. But the cold was coming, and I was tired, and I went out back. She was sitting on an upturned crate in the strip of shade behind the store, and she had a man's canvas coat across her knees, and she was mending it. I stood in the alley mouth a while before she knew I was there, or before she let me know she knew, which I later learned was not the same thing. I watched her hands. That's the part I keep coming back to all these years, the hands. They were brown and cracked across the knuckles, and there was a white scar down the back of the left one, and they moved over that torn canvas the way water moves over rock, like they had all the time in the world and knew exactly where they were going. She'd draw the needle up, and there'd be a little pause at the top of the stroke, a breath, and then down. Up, breath, down. She wasn't just closing the tear. She was matching the weave of the canvas with her thread so the mend would sit flat and take the strain and never show. I had never in my life watched anyone work with that much care over something that cheap. A canvas coat was worth $1.25 maybe if the buttons were bone. She was giving it a week of her attention like it was worth 100. "You want something," she said. She said it in English plain without turning her head. Her voice was low and even, and it had a burr in it I couldn't place. "Or you want to stand in my light." I came around into the shade. I held out the blanket. I meant to say something reasonable. I remember I had a sentence ready, something about could she close it, what would she charge, and instead I just held it out folded and said, "The tears in the middle." She set the coat down, she took the blanket from me, and I watched her whole body change. I don't know how else to say it. She'd been polite and closed the way you are with a stranger who's a certain kind of trouble, and then she opened the fold and saw the pattern, that red, that hand-talk my wife had put in it, and her breath caught. She turned it toward the light. She ran her thumb along a line of the weave, following it, the way you'd follow a sentence you were reading, and I saw her lips move a little, like she was sounding it out. "Who made this?" she said. Not a question the way she said it, a demand. "My wife. Where is she?" "Under a stone out at my place, 3 years now." The woman was quiet. She turned the torn edges of the blanket to face each other, fit them together, held them, and where the wool had frayed, she pressed the fibers back into line with her thumbnail, testing. She did all this without asking me anything, the way a doctor handles you. "She was taught by someone who was taught right," she said finally. "This is a hard red. You bake the root 3 days, you got to keep the fire even or it browns." She kept the fire even. She looked up at me for the first time, and her eyes were dark and steady and older than the rest of her, which wasn't old. "She loved you or she loved the work, maybe both. You don't put this much in a thing you don't love." I had to look away. I looked at the wall of the store at a nail with nothing on it, and I priced the nail because that was what I did when I could not stand up under a feeling. A penny. Worth a penny. There was nothing worth more than it cost that I could find to rest my eyes on, and I have never in my life felt so poor. "Can you close it?" I managed. "No," she said, and my heart went down like a dropped stone. "Then I can heal it." I looked back at her. "Close it, you'd see the seam," she said. She had gone back to studying the tear, all business now, and her hands were already moving, already choosing. "Every time you lay under it, you'd see the scar and think of the wire and the mule. That's no good. A blanket's for sleeping, not for remembering the bad way." She said it flat, like a rule everyone knew. "I can take the thread apart on both sides, back a hand's width, and reweave the middle new into the old so it takes up the pattern and carries it across. It won't be the same. Nothing torn is the same, but it'll be whole. You'll lay under it and it'll be warm and it won't lie to you and it won't cut you either. It'll just be a thing that got hurt once and got well." She glanced up. "That's the most you can do for anything." I have thought about that sentence every day for the rest of my life. I want you to know that. A woman I'd been raised to fear, mending a dead stranger's blanket in the dirt behind a store, told me the truest thing anyone ever told me about grief, and she didn't even know she was doing it. She thought she was talking about wool. "What'll it cost?" I said, because I am who I am. She named a price. It was too low. It was $1, and I knew, watching her hands, that it was a week of them, and $1 was robbery against her, not me. I stood there in the dirt doing the arithmetic I was so proud of, and for once in my life the columns wouldn't line up. Cost, $1. Worth, I couldn't find the bottom of it. She was going to take the last thing I had of my wife, and make it so I could carry it another 20 years. And she was going to do it for $1 because $1 was all a woman like her was allowed to ask a man like me. "I'll pay you 3, I said. Her head came up sharp. I said 1. 3. "I don't take pity," she said, and there was a heat in it now, the first crack in the flatness. "I take pay for work. $1, the work's worth $1 to you, you're a fool. 2, you can count. 3, you're paying for something that isn't the blanket, and I don't sell that." She held my eyes. "What are you paying for, mister?" And I didn't have an answer, or I had one and couldn't say it, which was that I hadn't watched anyone give a damn about anything in 3 years, hers or mine, and I'd forgotten there were people left in the world who did, and I wanted to pay her for reminding me that there were. But you can't say that to a stranger behind a store. 2, I said, and you count better than I do, and that's saying something. Something moved at the corner of her mouth. Not a smile, the country where a smile lives. 2, she agreed. "Come back in 6 days. It'll be done when it's done and not before, so don't come banging." I gave her the blanket. It was the hardest thing I'd done since the funeral, handing it over, and she saw that too. And she folded it against her chest with both arms the way you'd hold something breathing. And she nodded at me once, slow, like she was making a promise she didn't say out loud. I rode home. I didn't price a single thing the whole way, and I noticed that I didn't, and I couldn't have told you the last time that happened. Here's a thing about a small valley. Everybody's ledger is public. By the time I came back in 6 days, half the town knew I'd left my dead wife's Injun blanket with Halloran's squaw, and the tellers of it had already decided what it meant, which was nothing good. I heard it at the water trough from Emmett Doss before I'd even swung down. Doss ran the biggest outfit on that side of the valley, 3,000 head, a house with glass windows, a voice that carried. He'd wanted my South 40 for years because it held the only reliable seat between his range and the river, and I'd never sold, and that was the whole of why he hated me, though he'd have told you it was principle. Doss had lost a nephew to a raid down in Sonora, or said he had. The story got bigger every year. He'd taken it up as a kind of profession, his hatred. It gave a shape to a man who otherwise didn't have much of one. "Heard you got sentimental, Crane," he said, leaning on the trough, 3 of his hands ranged behind him, not quite listening. "Heard you're keeping company out back of Halloran's. I got a blanket mended." "By that one?" He shook his head, slow, mock sorrowful. "You know whose people burned the Prout place. You know what they did to the woman there." He always knew what they did to the woman there. It was his one card, and he played it in every hand. "And you're handing them your money and your dead wife's own hand's work. Cora'd be sick." I felt it land because he meant it to, because he knew Cora's name and how to use it. And I want to be honest. For one bad second I felt the flinch again, the raised-up thing, the wish to be back inside the wall of my own people, where a man is never wrong for hating the right target. Then I thought about the hands, the paws at the top of the stroke, breath and down. "Cora made that blanket for warmth," I said. "Woman out back understood that better in 6 days than you have in your whole life, Emmett. Now get off the trough, my horse is thirsty." It was a small thing to say. It felt at the time like stepping off a roof. Doss's face closed up. "You want to be careful, Crane," he said, quiet now, which was worse. "Man's known by his company. Times like these, a fella can get his stock scattered, his fences cut. Nobody'd blame the Apache," he smiled. "It's what they do." He walked off with his men. I stood there and understood, the way you understand weather changing, that I had just spent something I couldn't get back, and I hadn't even meant to, and I didn't regret it, and I was afraid. I went around back. She had the blanket laid out across 2 clean boards, and she was working the last of it, and I stopped dead because it was, I have to be careful with words here, I'm no poet, it was healed. There's no other word, and she'd given me the right one the first day. You could not find the tear. She'd unpicked my Cora's weave a hand's width to either side and carried it across the wound, married the new wool to the old so the pattern ran unbroken, that living red flowing over the place where the wire had torn it like water closing over a stone dropped in. If you'd carried it folded a certain way for a year the way I had, you could find the healed place by feel, a faint difference under the fingers, a firmness. But your eye slid right over it. Your eye said whole. "You changed the pattern," I said. My voice wasn't working right. No, she didn't look up. I finished a sentence she started. It goes the same way it was going, she just didn't get to the end of it. She bit the thread, tied it off, ran her palm flat across the whole width one last time, feeling for anything raised, finding nothing. Then she folded it, my fold, I saw. She'd learned my fold from the wear lines and kept it and held it out. I took it. It was warm from her hands and from the sun. I stood there holding my whole marriage in a square of wool a stranger had made well again, and I did not trust myself to speak. So I got out my ledger and my pencil to write the $2 down, and my hands were shaking, and I dropped the pencil. She picked it up. She looked at the ledger, open in my other hand, all those years of numbers, cost and worth, cost and worth. "You write down what things are worth," she said. It wasn't a question. She'd read it upside down in a second. "Cost," I said. "Mostly cost, the worth column I stopped. I don't fill in real well." She handed me the pencil back, and she looked at me for a long moment, and something passed over her face that I didn't understand then and would spend the next while of my life learning to read. A kind of recognition, one broke person clocking another across a distance. "Nobody does," she said. "That's the whole trouble with people." She stood, brushing wool from her skirt. $2. And you tell that fat one at the trough I heard him, and I'm not afraid of him, and my people didn't burn the Prout place, that was drunk white men dressed for it, and everybody in this valley knows it and lies. She said it without heat now, just laying it out, cost and worth. You won't tell him, but I wanted one person to hear it said true. I'll tell him, I said. She looked at me like she was pricing me, and finding the columns didn't line up and not minding. My name is Tsella, she said. You can say it, try it. Tsella. Close enough. The country where a smile lives again, and this time something almost crossed the border. Go home, mister, sleep warm. I paid her the $2. I rode home. I unfolded the blanket that night and laid under it and ran my fingers to the healed place and felt that faint, firm ridge where she'd carried my wife's sentence across the wound and finished it. And for the first time in 3 years, I slept the whole night through and did not dream of the fever or the stone. I want to tell you it was that simple, that a stranger mended a blanket and mended a man, and that was the end of the trouble. But I'd stepped that half-second. I put it in the ledger where I keep the things I owe. A man should know the price of his own cowardice. I spent the night and the next day getting my 40 head back out of the wash, and I did it alone, because when I rode to the 2 ranches nearest mine for help the way neighbors do, both men found reasons. Ackerley wouldn't meet my eye. Old Trout came right out with it. Emmett's put it around you've thrown in with the Apache, he said, standing in his doorway not asking me in. Says you sent your money out back of Halloran's and now your fence gets cut and next it'll be one of ours and it'll be your fault for stirring them up. I got grandkids here, Crane. I can't be seen. He shut the door. He was a decent man. That's what I want you to sit with. He was a decent man, and Doss had made helping me a thing a decent man couldn't be seen to do. That's how it works. That's how it always works. You don't need most people to be cruel. You just need them to be afraid of the cruel ones and call it prudence. I got my cattle in. I mended my fence. And then, because I am stubborn in the one direction God saw fit to make me stubborn, I rode into town and I went around back of Halloran's in daylight, where anyone could see, and I told Tsella what had happened. She listened without a word. She was working a coil of willow into the start of a basket, her fingers moving that same water-over-rock way, and she didn't stop while I talked, but I saw her hands slow at the part about the red wool on the door, saw them go careful, and I understood that she'd lived this before, this exact thing, more than once, and that the shape of it was old to her as the shape of the basket in her hands. You came to tell me, she said when I finished. Why? Because it's not right, and I thought you should hear it from somebody that it happened, and that I know it wasn't you, and that I said so. Said so to who? I was quiet. You said it to me, she said, not unkindly. You didn't say it to the town. There's a difference, and you know it, or you wouldn't have gone quiet just now. She set the basket down. I'm not scolding you, mister. It costs you to say it even to me. I see that. I'm telling you the size of the thing you're standing next to because you keep stepping toward it like a man who thinks it's a fence and it's a cliff. Then she told me about her sister. Her name was Nolan, I'll say it, because Tsella said it to me like handing over something breakable, and you keep a thing like that carefully. Nolan was 3 years younger, and she was down at San Carlos in the flats with Tsella's mother's people, in the bad water and the green beef and the counting. They were counted twice a day at San Carlos, made to stand and be counted like stock. And Tsella said that word, counted, and looked at my ledger pocket, and I felt it go into me like a blade turned slow. Nolan had a bad lung. The flats were killing her by inches the way the flats killed the mountain people, who were made for high, dry, cold air and set down in a fever swamp on purpose, because it was cheaper than a war. Tsella wasn't at San Carlos because 5 years back she'd been taken into a mission school and then out of it into service in a white household in Tucson, scrubbing and mending. And when that household broke up, she drifted here and found she could feed herself with her hands at the edge of a town that would let an Apache woman mend its coats as long as she stayed out back and cheap and quiet. She sent money to Nolan when she had it. Medicine when she could get it past the agent, who took his cut. She was saving, she showed me. She had a little sack, and she counted it out for me right there, and it was pitiful, and she counted it without shame because there was no shame in it, only arithmetic. She was saving to buy her sister out, or bribe her sister out, or somehow get Nolan up out of the flats to somewhere with air before the bad lung finished her. $200, she said. That's what it takes, to grease the right hands, get her marked off the rolls as dead or gone, move her north. I've got 31. She put the sack away. At $1 a coat, I'll have her out about the time we're both in the ground. She said it flat, cost and worth. So that's my war, mister. That's what I'm scared of, not your fat man. He's just weather. I'm scared my sister dies, counted in a swamp $200 from air. And I mend coats for men who'd let it happen and never know they did. I rode home and I got out my ledger and I sat at Cora's table and I filled in the worth column for the first time in 3 years. I had, if I sold hard, maybe $400 I could raise, the good geldings, the wagon, the surplus stock I'd been holding against a bad winter. 200 of it could buy a woman's sister out of a swamp. I sat there and I priced my whole life, cold, the way I was good at, and for the first time the numbers ran the other direction, and I understood what Cora had been trying to teach me for 14 years and died before I learned. That the worth column is the only one that matters, and it's written in what you're willing to lose. I didn't decide that night. I want to be honest. I'm not the man in the story who does the grand thing clean. I sat with it for a week. I found reasons. She's a stranger. It's not your fight. Doss'll ruin you. You'll be alone and broke and hated, and for what, a woman you've talked to twice out back of a store. All of it true, all of it in the cost column. What tipped me wasn't nobility. It was smaller, and I trust it more for being small. I went in the 8th day to bring her more mending, real work, my own things, torn oilskins and a saddle girth, $1 worth honest, and she wasn't out back. Halloran jerked his thumb. Doss and some boys came through, told me I was a fool letting her work here, bad for business, bad for the town, said it real friendly. He wouldn't look at me. I can't afford Doss down on me, Crane. I told her to move on, gave her till Friday. Where's she supposed to go? Halloran shrugged, and it was Truth's shrug, and Ackerley's, the great shrug of decent men, the shrug that has done more evil in this world than all the cruelty ever managed, because the cruelty needs it to work. Not my lookout, he said. I found her at the edge of town, at the little camp by the dry wash where the ones who weren't allowed inside stayed. A couple of Mexican families, an old Yaqui man and Nautsela, sitting by a fire that was mostly smoke, her whole life in a bundle beside her, mending someone's shirt in the last light because that was what her hands did when the rest of her had nowhere to go. I sat down across the fire from her without being asked. That was the first time. I'd never sat at her fire. Come out to my place, I said. There's work, real work, a year of it, Cora's things I never dealt with, the tax a ruin, there's weaving to do, hides. I'll pay fair, a fair wage, in front of God and Emmett Doss and anybody. And there's a back room was Cora's mother's, dry, got a door that locks from the inside. I made myself say that part plain so there'd be no mistaking it, so she'd know the offer had no other price hidden in it. And when we've got the year's wage saved, it'll be past $200, and we'll go get your sister out of that swamp together, because I've got geldings worth more than a girl's lung is apparently worth to this country, and I'm ashamed of every day I didn't know that. She was still for a long time. The fire ticked. Somewhere a dog. The old Yaqui man watched us both from across the camp with eyes that had seen every kind of white man's offer and weighed them all and found them wanting. You know what it'll cost you, Tsela said finally. An Apache woman living at your place. They'll cut more than your fence. They'll say things about me and worse about you. You'll lose the town. I lost the town when I told Doss to get off the trough. I just didn't know it was a bargain. Your dead wife's people are the ones took my people's land. I know it. You don't get to fix that by being kind to me. I'm not a way to pay off your guilt. If that's what this is, I'll starve at this fire first, I mean that. It's not that. I looked at her across the smoke, and I made myself say the true thing, which is harder than any grand thing. I watched you spend a week of your hands on a $1 coat like it was worth 100. I watched you finish a sentence my dead wife started and never once make it about you. I've been dead 3 years and you didn't even mean to, and you woke me up, and I don't have a word for what that's worth, and I've spent my whole life pricing things, and I stopped. My voice had gone. I want to be around someone who fills in the worth column, that's all. That's the whole of it. The rest will figure honest. The old Yaqui man, I swear to you, snorted softly, like a man who'd heard a fool tell the truth and was surprised by it. Tsela looked into the fire. When she spoke, it wasn't yes. I'll come and work, she said. For the wage, in front of God and the fat man, like you said, locked room, fair pay. We save for Nolan. She raised her eyes, and they were hard and clear, and they held mine and did not let go. And the other thing, the thing you almost said and didn't, that stays in the ground, mister. You hear me? I've had white men decide I was theirs to be kind to. I won't be a kindness. I won't be a guilt. I'll be a woman who does good work and gets paid and goes and saves her sister, and if there's ever anything else, it'll be because I walked to it on my own 2 feet and not one day sooner, and it might be never. Those are the terms. Take them or I stay at this fire." "Those are good terms," I said. "Better than I offered, you count better than me." "I've told you that twice now." And she almost, and then she looked away and started gathering her bundle, and the deal was struck. She came to the ranch the next morning in the back of my wagon with her whole life in one bundle and a basket half finished on her lap. And Emmett Doss watched us pass the edge of town from his fine horse and said nothing. And his saying nothing was the loudest thing in the valley. The trouble came 10 days later, and it came worse than Fenswire. And it came the way she'd warned me, not from the mountains, from the men who used the mountains as an excuse. I woke to the smell of smoke that was not my chimney, and I came out onto the porch, and my hay barn was burning against the dawn, and in the light of it, tacked to the porch post where I'd find it, was a scrap of paper with 3 words in a hand I knew from the feed store credit slips. "Send her back." And behind me in the doorway, Sella stood looking at the burning barn with an expression I'd never seen on her, not fear. Something older and more tired than fear. The face of a woman who has watched her whole life burn before and knows the shape of the fire, and knows it is never really about the barn. I did not send her back. I want to be clear that this was not courage. By then it wasn't a choice a man makes. It was a thing you find already decided in you when the moment comes, like reaching to catch what falls. My barn was burning and there were 3 words on my porch post, and I stood there in my nightshirt with the heat on my face, and I felt the last of the old raised-up fear burn off me for good, and what was left underneath was very simple and very cold. This was my land. That was my barn, and the woman behind me in the doorway was worth more than the whole valley's opinion of her, and I had spent my life pricing things, and I was, at last, correct about one. We saved what we could. The barn was gone by full light. I lost the hay, which was the winter, which meant I'd have to sell more stock than I'd planned, which meant, the ledger told me even then, that we were closer to $200, not farther, because a man selling out has cash in hand. I laughed at that, standing in the ash. Sella looked at me like I'd cracked. "The barn burning got me nearer your sister's freedom," I said. "I'm going to send Emmett Doss a thank you note." And she didn't laugh, but the country where a smile lives got a little closer to the border, and she started, without a word, carrying water to the smoking ground so the coals wouldn't take the grass, and I joined her, and we worked side by side in the gray light, and that was the first thing we ever built together, a wet black ring of safety around a ruin. Here's what Doss got wrong, and men like him always get it wrong. He thought fear was the strongest thing. He'd built his whole life on it, but he'd never sat at a fire with nothing left to lose. He didn't understand that there's a place past fear where a person gets very quiet and very free, and that both Sella and I had walked there now, her long before me, and that you cannot burn out a person who's already been to the far side of the fire and back. We sold the geldings that week, all 4. I'd raised them from foals, and I'd priced them 100 times, and I sold them to a horse buyer down from Prescott and did not haggle, and it near killed me, and it was the easiest sale I ever made. 2 of them to a man who'd used them kind. I checked. I made that part of the price, though it lowered it. The wagon went. The surplus stock. I sat at Cora's table at the end of it with the little iron box open, and counted it out with Sella across from me, counting the same money to check my arithmetic. Because she counted better than me, and we both knew it. And when we finished, it was $211, and 31 of it was hers, saved $1 a coat over 3 years. And she put her 31 in the box with my 180 because she said Nolan was hers to buy, and she'd not have it be a gift. It'd be a thing she paid toward with her own hands, and I understood by then not to argue with the worth column when it spoke. We rode to San Carlos in a borrowed wagon in the worst of the summer. I won't tell you all of what I saw in the flats, because some of it isn't mine to tell, and some of it I've never found the words for and never will. I'll tell you it was worse than the worst thing Doss ever said about the Apache, except the direction of the cruelty was the opposite of the one he claimed. I'll tell you about the counting. They stood the people in lines in the killing heat and counted them like Sella said, twice a day, and I stood at the edge of it with my hat in my hands, and I felt every number I'd ever written in my ledger turn to ash in my chest. I had spent my life reducing things to figures. I had thought it was a kind of honesty. Standing in the flats at San Carlos watching human beings counted like stock by men with clipboards, I understood what pricing a thing can be made to do, and I have never picked up that pencil the same way since. The agent wanted $40 over the 200. Of course he did. There's always a DOS at every gate, and this one wore a government coat and had soft hands and a way of not quite saying the bribe out loud, the great cowardly art of the decent-seeming man. We didn't have 40 more. We stood in his office, and I watched Sella's face, and I saw her doing the arithmetic that had no answer, the columns that wouldn't line up, and I did the thing I'd learned from her. I took out my ledger, the gray leather one, and I opened it, and I tore out the whole worth column, all the pages, 3 years of nothing and 1 month of everything, and I laid them on his desk on top of the $200. That's my accounting, I said. That's what I'm worth and what I owe. You can have the pages too, they're the truest thing I've got, and they're worth more than $40 to me and nothing at all to you, which is exactly why I'm giving them to you instead. Now take the money and give this woman her sister, or by God I will sit down in your flats and be counted with them until you do. And I will write to every newspaper in the territory about your soft hands. And I have got nothing left to lose, sir, which you'd know if you'd ever once been to the far side of a fire. I don't know why it worked. Maybe the pages. Maybe he was tired. Maybe even a man like that has a place in him that flinches when a stranger names his softness out loud. He took the 200. He didn't take the pages, but he looked at them a long moment before he pushed them back, and I've wondered ever since what he saw. He made a mark in his own ledger. Of course it was a ledger. It's always a ledger. And he said some words, and it was done. And a swamp gave up a woman for the price of 4 geldings, and a wagon, and 3 years of a widow's $1-a-coat wages, and a torn-out column of a fool's accounting. Nolan was smaller than her sister, and the bad lung was in her voice. You could hear it, a wet catch under the words. When they brought her out and she saw Sella, neither of them ran to the other, which surprised me until I understood they'd learned, both of them, that you don't show the guards what you love. You keep it flat, you keep it counted, you carry it out quiet and unpack it later where they can't see. They walked toward each other slow, and they took each other's hands and stood forehead to forehead, not making a sound. And Sella's shoulders went once, and that was all. And I turned around and looked at the mountains and let them have it private. We took Nolan north. Not to my ranch, that's not where this ends, and I'll tell you why in a moment, because it's the part I've argued with God about. We took her up to the high country where the air was cold and dry and made for mountain lungs, to some of Sella's mother's people who'd gotten out early and settled quiet on land nobody wanted yet, and we left her there where she could get well, or get as well as the flats had left her able to. And Sella stood with her sister, and there was a choosing in front of her that I saw coming a day before she did, and I did not say a word about, because I'd learned the terms, and the terms said she walked to things on her own 2 feet and not 1 day sooner. She could stay, that was the choosing. Stay in the high country with her own people and her mended sister and the cold, clean air, safe, home among faces that didn't flinch. Or come back down to a burned-out ranch in a valley that hated her, with a widower who filled in his worth column 3 years too late. I'd have taken her north and left her there and ridden home alone. I want you to know that. That was in me to do, and I'd made my peace with it on the ride up, and it was the truest measure of whether I'd learned anything at all, that I could love the worth of a thing enough to lose it on purpose if losing it was what the worth required. Cora'd have been proud of me for that, finally, and it only took her being 3 years dead. Sella came and found me by the wagon on the last morning. The sky up there was the kind of blue that has no bottom. She had her bundle in her hand, and I didn't know which way the bundle meant. You'd have left me here, she said. Ridden home, not asked. Those were the terms. They were. She set the bundle in the wagon bed. My heart did something I don't have the arithmetic for. I want to say why I'm getting in this wagon, and I want you to hear it right, because if you get it wrong, I'll get back out. She looked at me steady, the way she had the first day, pricing me, the columns finally lining up. I'm not getting in because I owe you. The money's square, my 31's in it. We're even, don't you dare do sums about it. I'm not getting in because I'm scared to be alone or because a woman needs a man's roof. Nolan's here, she's home, I could stay and be safe and it'd be a good life. She put her hand flat on the wagon's side, the scarred hand, the one that mended everything. I'm getting in because down there in that valley there's a burned barn we've got to rebuild, and a fence that keeps getting cut, and a man who spent 3 years dead and needs someone around who fills in the worth column, and I find, God help me, that I want to be the one that does it. Not for you. With you. There's a difference, and I'll thump you if you ever forget it. I won't forget it, I said. I could barely say it. We'll build it back different, she said. The barn, the whole place, half your way, half mine. I've got ideas about the hides and the weaving that'll bring in more than dollar coats, and you've got a head for numbers that'd be worth something if you pointed it at what things are actually worth for once. And between us, we'll make a thing that's, she reached for it, a thing that got hurt once and got well. Both of us, the place, all of it. That's the most you can do for anything. She climbed up onto the seat beside me and took up the reins like they were hers, because by then they were. You going to sit there, or are we going to go weave ourselves a future? It won't be the same as the one you lost. Nothing torn is, but it'll be whole, and it won't lie to us and it won't cut us either. I picked up my end of the reins. Down below us, the whole hard country spread out gold and cruel and beautiful, the valley that hated us waiting at the bottom of it. The burned barn, the cut fence, the fat man, all of it. The whole cost of what we were about to do laid out plain. And for the first time in my life, I looked at a thing I couldn't afford and knew exactly, to the penny, what it was worth. We started down. I never did fill in the cost column again after that day. Sella wouldn't let me. She said a man who's been to the far side of the fire has got no more use for it, and she was right. She counted better than me, she always did. We built the barn back before the snow. Half my way, half hers. You could find the healed place if you knew where to feel for it.